In a world where education is key, finding the right math program for your kids is crucial. And that's where CTC Math steps in. This isn't just another math program, it's a comprehensive math curriculum covering everything from K to 12. What sets it apart? The video tutorials. They're not just educational, they're engaging, breaking down complex topics into bite-sized, understandable pieces. It's like having a math expert in your home, available anytime. And it's not about memorizing facts. It's about truly understanding math concepts. The kind of understanding that sticks with them, not just until the next test, but for life. Plus, the flexibility is unbeatable. Whether you're homeschooling or supplementing after-school learning, CTC Math fits into your schedule, not the other way around. Why not take the leap? Visit ctcmath.com today and start your free trial. Discover how a comprehensive curriculum can challenge your child's perspective on math. It's time to give them the tools they need to succeed. That's ctcmath.com.
This is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Welcome to the Vintage Homeschool Moms Show. Your host, Felice Gerwitz, is an author, a publisher, and your radio show host. She will encourage, educate, and inspire you with answers to your most pressing questions, from homeschool, marriage, parenting, and much more. Felice loves to equip moms to live a Christian life because every moment counts. Be sure to visit her website at mediaangels.com. And here's your host, Felice Gerwitz.
Well, hi and welcome. My name is Felice Gerwitz, and today I am definitely going to feel like the moderator because when you put Tara and I on the line, she will take it away. So I want to welcome my good friend Terra Jenner with thebraintrainers.net. Welcome, Tara.
Thank you so much for having me, Felice.
Oh, I'm excited, Tara, and I was laughing because today my phone was on mute this morning, and so I pulled it out, and I'm thinking, okay, I probably have about 10 text messages because whenever I seem to turn my phone off or silence it, that happens. And sure enough, there were a bunch of text messages, and one from a local friend of mine who had gotten my email and had read through it really quick and meant to save it and instead accidentally deleted it. And she said she was going to be coming today because this was such a good topic. So, Jesse, hopefully you'll be able to hear this audio, and I'm giving you a shout-out because whenever any of our local friends decide to come hear a topic, we know that it's a good one. So, Tara, you and I met many years ago at an ice skating rink of all places where our kids were taking some skating lessons off time because as homeschoolers we have access to this amazing stuff going on in our communities because all the schools are in session. And Tara and I began talking, and she was sharing with me some of the things that she was seeing in her daughter. And Tara, being an attorney, has that, and I think you have like an investigative reporter side of your brain where you're, really researching and looking into things. And Tara said, well, I looked you up online, and I found out you have a background in learning disabilities, and I wanted to know if you could help me with this issue. And I think I looked at you very flippantly, Tara, and jokingly said, oh, yeah, everything I learned in pretty much doesn't work because I've tried a lot of that with my own kids and also as a classroom teacher with specific learning disabilities. So they taught us to teach to their strengths and pretty much ignore their weaknesses. And you and I have learned over the years that that really is faulty thinking, and it is important, as Tara, you put it, to get that hard drive working so the software will then be able to be used. And so, with that introduction, I want you to fill in some of the pieces here where, you've gotten some cognitive training. You've not only quote-unquote fixed your own child, but also a few of mine, along with teaching me and training me to work with my own children.
Well, one thing that I should note is that a lot of people who have children with academic struggles, they will and I would say this, appropriately recognize where their children's strengths are. And their concern is that if you use this word fix, that we're going to undo the good that they already have in their areas of strength. And so I'd like to just emphasize the fact that when we do cognitive retraining of children or even adults, what we're doing is we're not taking away from what their current strengths are. We're just adding and improving the areas of weaknesses. So whatever nifty little skills or techniques your kid has, their ability to do something very, very well above and beyond other people, we're never going to take that away. We're not trying to pull down anything. We're just trying to pull up where the weaknesses are. And the example I would use is if you have a guitar and it has 6 strings on it, but, hopefully, but if it's missing a string or two or they're out of tune, you wouldn't turn around to the child and say, well, just play whatever tunes you can with whatever remaining strings that potentially function. They do that to a child. You'd restring the guitar. So when we tell a child, just deal with your strengths, what we're doing is we're telling them to work with whatever strings they might have. Alternatively, we might turn around in an academic environment and they'll say, well, you know what, that one's not working at all, so let's just give you the triangle. And that's just using modifications or accommodations. And although those can allow a student to progress for a period of time and for a season, it doesn't give them the independent ability to be able to continue with their academics without those modifications and accommodations. And unfortunately, even though under the Americans with Disabilities Act, modifications and accommodations are required in the workplace, there are limitations to that. And if, for example, your processing speed is slow or you can't follow verbal instructions, you're not going to get the job in the first place or be able to keep up with your peers. And so, the key here is repair that hard drive. You get to keep all the good stuff you've currently got. You're just working on the things that are weak.
Very good, very good. And so today's going to be jam-packed, so I better start with, some of the selected questions that we discussed. And, this is definitely something that is not something you can learn overnight. Let's just put it that way. And I know for those of us that have special needs children, I used to jokingly say, well, I used to pray to the Lord for patience, and so you definitely need buku of patience when you work with children, who learn differently, right? We don't really like to say special needs. I know that, Tara, you have a lot more creative wording for that kind of thing than I do, but it kind of it's a gamut of, children who struggle and who learn differently. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is the English language, and sometimes I wonder at the spelling of the words. I used to struggle with spelling, and, now I'm a fairly good speller, except there are certain words like tomorrow that for the life of me I cannot spell. I wanted to either double the M or the R, depending on what day it is. But, the English language is difficult when it comes to sound to code. And, Tara, you talk about that a lot. You say, English is a sound to code language. So what does that mean?
Well, simply put, the complexity that you're talking about with spelling can actually be simplified quite dramatically when instead of looking at the way they teach it in a lot of schools is they'll teach, for example, the letter A can be pronounced A, O, and so forth, okay? The reality is the letter A doesn't say anything at all. The letter A is a piece of squiggle on a piece of paper. It is a symbolic representation of a sound. There are well over 150 written symbolic representations of the English sound, but there are only between 44 and 48 actual individual unique sounds in English. And yes, I know I'm sounding like I'm hedging when I say 44 to 48. It depends upon what expert you're talking to as to how many they think there really are. And you also have some regional dialects and variations which can add or take away from some of those sound components. But English is a sound to code language. And what that means is for every sound in the English language, there is one or more written symbols that can be used to represent that sound. So, for example, the sound A can be written 8 different ways. And the way that I teach it and the way that the protocols that I use teach it is we use a memory sentence that contains words that uses all the written permutations of the sound A. So here's your one for A. At the lake, there's your A-E version. The rain, A-I, fell on the lady, A, all by itself. She had to pay, A-Y, to have her gray, E-Y, and beige, E-I, dress clean. It cost 8, E-I-G-H, all 4 of those, just for one sound of A, $8 to have her dress clean. And it did not break, E-A, her budget. That would have broken my budget. So that's at the lake, the rain fell on the lady, she had to pay to have her gray and beige dress clean. It cost $8 and did not break her budget. And then what we do is we'll have the students do like a little picture of that storyline so that they can easily flip through all those potential permutations of the written sound or the written symbols for the sound A. And it helps them because then when they get a word that is containing the sound A, they can go, okay, now if I'm going to write this, I need to use one of these 8 permutations. Now, which one do I think it is? And now the dictionary becomes a useful tool rather than a torture device. Conversely, if you're reading English and you see a letter or a group of letters, you will start seeing them as clusters and groups. And you'll go, oh, that cluster can represent this particular sound. Where it gets complicated and where you have your complaints, Felice, and I agree with you, is English has some overlaps. There are some written symbol combinations that represent more than one sound. So, for example, you can have O-W, and it can be O, and O-W can also be ow. So there is your overlap. So the key is when you're looking at the written symbols, you need to know, oh, this combination can be representative of multiple sounds. Which one works within the body of this particular word? There are other languages. Yeah, there are other languages, though, that are actually not sound to code. For example, Chinese. Chinese, the symbols represent a whole word or concept, and that's a visual skill. That's a visual processing skill. That's using a different part of the brain. And so for that reason, they look at things differently. So I think of English and the way the sounds and the codes work a little bit like a paint-by-number picture. If you have a paint-by-number picture, you're going to have numbers on the actual picture itself, and you're going to have numbers on the paint pot. And the color of the paint pot content matches number to number. Both go together. And so if you think of one as being the sound and the other being the written symbol in English, as long as you have the connection between the two, you can always paint the exact same painting as anybody else on earth who's got the same kit that you have. And that applies to even people that are colorblind. They don't have a problem. They can color the exact same picture, even if they can't see the color, because they've got the code that connects the number on the page to the number on the paint pot. English language is the same way. If you can hear the sounds, you can break them apart and you can blend them together, and you can associate each of those sounds with their various written symbols. You can learn to spell and you can learn to read. Where we have a difficulty is when you cannot hear one or more of those sounds. You can't hear them correctly. You can't blend them together or segment them. Then you have difficulty associating with symbols. You have difficulty with spelling. You have difficulty with reading. And if your reading fluency isn't fast enough, the brain cannot then interpret the content, and so your comprehension level goes down. And so that would be a little bit like the paint by numbers scenario, but taking some of the numbers off the paint pot or removing some of the numbers off the page, whichever one. And if you're colorblind, now you're guessing on those ones that have the missing codes, the missing connections.
Oh, that's really good. And that really explains a lot more, doesn't it? It just gives us a little bit more of an inkling on the complexity and also the simplicity if both of those words can be joined together. But I love that sentence, Tara. That really makes sense, and it gives the kids a handle on where to start. So that was really good. So, there's a ton of sounds in the English language, and, you kind of alluded to the, 44 to 46?
44 to 48, yeah.
Okay, to 48. So can you give us some, specific examples?
I
know, we're on the phone here, and it is internet and, a conference line.
I'll give some sample words that go with it in order to make it a little clearer.
Okay, good. All right.
Yeah. One thing that I would like to say is, in my estimation, and again, experts agree to disagree, I think there are only 4 true blended sounds. And what I mean by that is sounds that are a unique sound, but they are comprised of more than one initial individual sound. And let me give you an example. The sound qu, like in queen, it's represented by the symbols QU. But it is true blends of the sound k, like in kite, and w, like in want. K, w. But it's blended together to qu. And it becomes a unique individual sound because the characteristics are slightly different when you blend them together. But they do come from an original sound. The same thing with the sound k, like in fox. It's a k combination. The other two that I think are true blends are your like thing, and your like think. Because the N representation sound is a little more nasal and a little bit different when it's blended together like that. Unfortunately, there are an awful lot of programs out there that teach artificial blends, which would include things like like spring, whereas I am a firm believer that it is individual sounds rather than a sound. Why add more sounds in than you need to? And we see this coming up an awful lot with the ending ing. It's just add ing. And so you think ing is a grouping, ing, and that's why we see an awful lot of kiddos out there, they will write song, S-O-I-N-G, because they've got ing on the brain, and so they put it in there. But let me give you a couple of the sounds in English. The ones that I love the most are your short vowels, and the reason I like these is because there's a nifty little way to learn them that's also ergonomically sound to the mouth, and it also has the neural pathways very closely connected in the brain. And these, instead of A-E-I-O-U, which we always do, if you take just a minute, stop and say to yourself out loud using your mouth, A-E-I-O-U, and feel how your mouth is moving all over the place while you're doing this. And now do the sounds if, like an igloo, like an egg, like an apple, like an umbrella, and like an octopus. And now say them again, and while you're doing it this time, put your fingers underneath your chin and notice as we say them in this order that your chin drops incrementally each time. So try it again. Ah. Now if you happen to be near a mirror, this will be easier. But if not, just put your fingers on the corners of your mouth and say them again and see how as you're saying these sounds in this particular order, your mouth is getting closer and closer together. You're going from a broad smile to more of a pursed, open O sound. So, ah. So your mouth actually becomes more relaxed as you go through the sounds. And so incrementally, your jaw goes down and your mouth relaxes and comes in if you say it in that order. And so it's ergonomically easy for your mouth to do it. Your mouth isn't having to try and do all these strange muscular motions all over the place. And if you practice your short vowel sounds in that format, then it makes it a whole lot easier for your mouth to then subsequently drop from I to ah, because it's used to skipping through all those intermediate positions. And whatever the mouth does, unless you're a ventriloquist of some renown, whatever your mouth does, the shape of the mouth, the placement of the lips, the placement of the tongue, the location of where you're putting your emphasis of air, all will create a specific sound. I defy anyone to make the sound like in mom with their mouth open. It doesn't work. It isn't going to happen because you need to have those lips together to make that particular sound. So there's different sounds out there. A couple of other sounds that are very common, that are very tricky, though, would be your sound this, like in dog, and b, like in boy. They're very similar in nature as far as their sound. The only difference is the lips. And if, again, your student or you are familiar with where your lip placement needs to be, it makes it easier for them to make the correct sound. And if they're familiar with where the lip placement is going to be, if they're having difficulty hearing that sound, it makes them easier to identify it because they can use a visual support until their auditory comes up to snuff. So those are just some examples.
Wow, that's great.
I was going to say there is one that's not normally represented, and that's the sound Z. We sort of write it as two hashed lines, and in between it a Z and an H. And that would be like in the word television, okay, that Z sound.
Very good. And you know, that makes me think of, so many different labels people have for kids. And, truthfully, you do need some labels because it's hard to know exactly, what the protocol or diagnosis and then protocol is going to be. And, you probably can explain protocol better than I can, Tara, but it's basically what the prescription is going to be or how you're going to help to address or fix the problem.
I'm never worried about labels, Felice.
I know you don't.
Labels are used as a starting point. If labels are used as a starting point rather than a condemnation, they're a useful tool. Because the reality is if you don't place the proper label on your child, someone else will. And unfortunately, the other labels usually tend to be personally condemning. They're lazy. They're defiant. They're not trying hard enough. They're bad. These ones are way more harmful labels than they have an auditory processing deficit that we're working on. They have a visual processing issue. You wouldn't sit there and accuse a child who needs glasses of being lazy because they can't do their work. You would say, wow, they just need glasses. So it's the same thing with these other ones. The difference is we're talking about what I would call invisible disabilities. They're not as noticeable as some of the visual ones. And that's one of the reasons why, I told you this, I think, a couple of times before. A lot of people think this word dyslexia refers to letters being flipped or reversed. It's very commonly assumed that's what dyslexia is. And that's not, in fact, the case. Because dyslexia is just a fancy way of saying difficulty spelling, reading, or comprehending. It doesn't attribute the cause. It just tells you what the conclusion is. And so, interestingly enough, as we look through people that have difficulty spelling, reading, and comprehending, only about 20% even have an issue with the letters that they have difficulty focusing on. 80% of them have an auditory processing problem.
Right. And
the difference is that's going on in their head, so you can't see it. And they can't tell you I don't hear the sound right because they don't know they don't hear the sound right because they've never heard the sound right in the first place. Or they didn't know they were supposed to be able to blend or they didn't know they were supposed to be able to segment. And it would be like back to the colorblind thing. How does a colorblind person tell you they can't see color when they don't know what color is?
Right.
But if they write the letter backwards, that's noticeable to the outside person because there is something visual that you can see. And we also have oftentimes individuals who have an auditory processing problem tend to be a little bit more, I don't want to use the word delayed because that's not an appropriate thing. It may take them a little bit more effort to articulate what they do perceive is going on versus those that may have a visual processing problem and no auditory component. So your people that have letters flipping back and forth, they may be more able to articulate what's going on. And so the smaller group of people are going to be heard more because they're more frequently able to articulate it.
Very good. That makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of these things, and I'm going to take a short break. But when we come back, I want to really get into what auditory has to do with the written language. So just hold tight.
Maybe we can get some examples to find out how to play some games to help work on auditory and strengthen it, and how to identify where there may be auditory weaknesses.
Great. All right, we'll be right back. Hold on.
Super.
My name is Felice Gerwitz, and I want to introduce you to my publishing company, Media Angels. I have a heart for homeschool families, and since 1994, I have poured my efforts into creating curriculum to support teaching science, especially from a creationist worldview to the homeschool community. My curriculum was selected by Kathy Duffy in her 101 top homeschool picks. Another labor of love is a 3-book novel series specifically for homeschoolers with a creation focus, the Truth Seekers Mystery Series that I co-authored with my daughter Christina. Media Angels represents uncompromising quality, not only with books, but with an online homeschool convention and this ultimate homeschool radio network with amazing show hosts. Along with books, Media Angels has produced an American history and an American government video series, as well as a family Bible study, Homeschooling with Proverbs. It has been my pleasure to mentor countless homeschool families and missionaries worldwide. I also enjoy mentoring aspiring authors with one-on-one coaching and the Information in a Nutshell series. If we haven't met, please reach out. I'd love to help you on your homeschooling journey, or if you have a book, help you getting that into print. I can be found on social media and look forward to meeting you. You can reach me at MediaAngels.com. Thanks so much, and hope to meet you soon.
Hi, and welcome back. My name is Felice Gerwitz, and today we're talking with Terra Jenner about auditory deficiencies and how they affect reading, spelling, and comprehension. And Tara, before we took a break, we discussed a little bit about some things, the sounds and sound decode and labeling and that sort of thing. And now we're really going to get into some of the nitty-gritty and ways that parents can maybe do some identification here and also help their child. So what does auditory processing have to do with the written language, and how can, that make any sense when we think it really is a visual processing issue?
Yeah, again, like I was saying earlier, since English is a sound decode language, if we can't hear those individual sounds or we can't segment them or blend them, it can cause difficulty. So here's an example. If I give you the word cat and I ask you to drop the k sound and tell me what's left is the at part. That would be your segmenting. I'm pulling something out and breaking it apart. And this is necessary because if I'm spelling the word cat, I need to take the whole combined word cat, which now is blended all together, and I need to break it down into its unique components, k, a, and t. And then I need to associate the k with the letter C, the a with the letter A, and the t with the letter T. If I cannot break it apart and subsequently associate the sound with the codes, I won't be able to spell. Now, if I have my codes and sounds in hand, but I don't know which I need to use. Maybe it's a K, maybe it's a CH, like in Christmas, or maybe it's a K. K, C, CH, there's a bunch of sounds out there. There's even a QU, like in marquee. So which sound do I need? Well, I go through my story sentence that we have for each of our sounds, and you can create your own, and then you would use your dictionary in order to figure out what it would be. And that's how you can actually use your dictionary to help you with your sounds. Now, the advantage of using the dictionary versus having your spell check is it takes a little effort to use the dictionary. And human nature is we don't like to use effort. So if we look it up and we have to actually put a little effort into it, chances of us remembering it and retaining that piece of information, which code went with that particular sound, that particular word, we're more likely to retain that information and not have to continuously go back and redo our effort of figuring out how to spell that word. Okay? And we'll work on you with the word tomorrow. I'll do that with you later today.
Oh, gosh. I know. I keep saying that. I'm going to say, well, one of my children really struggled with some auditory issues, and, Tara's, I can laugh at my inadequacies. Maybe some people can't, but Tara just looked at me and goes, well, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Instead of being offended,
not always.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does, but
yeah. So, but,
well, that's the spelling side. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, but I was going to say, with auditory, like one of the things as a kid even growing up, I never got jokes. Like I was one of those people that it took me a minute to clue in, and then I'd laugh, hysterically like too late, and I think it was just my brain, getting into gear. And through the years, because of all the work I've done, writing, publishing, online audio interviews and things like that, I've improved greatly. It's almost as if my brain clicked in. And, I wanted to talk about one of the things, too, that is, that they'll say, you'll hear when I say they, quote unquote, some of the educators will say that, you should just work to the strengths because your brain will compensate. What do you have to say about compensation?
There's an element of compensation, but the reality is if you compensate too long, it starts becoming a crutch. Say, for example, you've broken your leg. You definitely need to put a cast on it. And the cast is going to help stabilize that limb until such time as the bones fuse. But if the bones fuse and you keep that cast on past a certain point, what's really going to happen is the bones are going to become very, very weak, because the reason that bones actually stay strong is because of the ongoing jostling and jarring creates an additional calcification and strengthens it. If we keep that cast on too long, we end up weakening the underlying structure. And I think of accommodations and modifications as very similar. It's very good to have them in place while you're working on repairing the underlying problem. But once the underlying problem is resolved or resolving, you slowly reduce and eliminate those accommodations and modifications so that you have standalone skill and strength.
Mhm. Okay. And
kind
so
of
did you have any?
You mentioned something very interesting about the telling the jokes and all. There isn't really such thing as a standalone cognitive skill. I mean, yes, we're talking about auditory, and yes, it is very important, but auditory doesn't stand alone. For example, in order for you to be able to do the spelling and the reading, you also have to have visual processing skills because you have to be able to see and identify the letters or combinations of letters. And that's another skill altogether. And so your auditory has to be able to communicate effectively and efficiently with the visual skills. And so if I'm reading a story and it's talking to me about the cat sitting on the mat, I need to see visual data, transfer it to auditory information. Then if I'm really going to retain it long term, I need to transfer it back to a visual picture, or if you will, a movie in your mind of what it is that you're seeing. Now, if I'm going to write it out another day, I need to then transfer it back to auditory information, decode it, and break down the sounds, and then transfer it back into its symbolic representation and put it down on paper. So you're dealing with auditory, you're dealing with visual when you're doing reading and spelling, and comprehension also is significantly strengthened when you can translate what you're hearing into a visual picture. And that uses another portion of the brain, which is called the corpus callosum, if you will. It's like the bridge between the two hemispheres. And if that's weak, then it's like having a great cell phone, and somebody else has a great cell phone, but your connection is no good. It doesn't do you any good because you still can't communicate. So there's different parts of the brain that need to be worked, and they need to be worked in concert with one another because they're a system. They're not standalone. And so there are different features that we have to take into consideration. So when I'm looking at reading comprehension, I'm looking at, is this person able to, read the words out loud fluently? Okay, yes, they can do that. Maybe then they're still having trouble with reading comprehension. It might be that they're having trouble transferring what they're reading and hearing into a visual picture to give them an understanding of the flow and the sequence of events. So it's a lot more complicated than just, hey, if you know your sounds, you know your codes, you can read, you can spell, bam, comprehension is going to be there. It's a big piece of the puzzle. There's no question about that. And that's one of the reasons that when I do testing, I use something called the TAPS-3 test. It stands for Test of Auditory Processing Skills, and it's the third version of it. And the reason I like that test is it tests blending, it tests segmenting, and it also tests clarity of sound. So if I hear a sound incorrectly, that's going to significantly impact how I'm going to reproduce the sound, how I'm going to write the sound, and potentially my comprehension of it. There's also another component that I don't currently test for, but there are tests for it, and that deals with foreground and background noise. And if you know anyone who is really distracted by background noise, and it almost sounds to them as if it's foreground noise, it can definitely compete with their ability to stay attentive and focused on a conversation. And that can impact comprehension in a communication setting. And if you're trying to, Felice, transfer the data that someone's telling you into humor, which is another area of the brain entirely, and, then addressing appropriate responses and all to it, you've got a whole bunch of things going on there.
Well, of course I always do, right? I've got, 20 screens open as we speak, so there's always something going on, and I totally disagree with those people who say that multitasking is bad, because I think I'd get very bored if I just did it one way. But we have a bunch of questions here, Tara, so a couple came in earlier, and then there's two more. But I really wanted to, before I take those, go through some tips and games. So what are some tips we can give to learning individual sounds?
Well, one of the things that I like to do is I like playing little games. And so there's a number of games. And the first thing I like doing is verifying that the student can actually hear the individual sounds that are out there. So some of the games that we play in our family, my daughter actually came up with the vast majority of these. One is called Copy Me. And, it's the old-fashioned thing of, don't copy me, don't copy me, I said stop it, that back and forth routine that you have with kids periodically. Well, except this is done with a purpose. What you do is you take nonsense words and you say a nonsense word. And you try and make it one that, after time, each of your words incorporates one or more of the sounds that you're going to be working with. Start off small. So you'd say plink, and I would ask you to repeat it. So go ahead and repeat that one, please. Plink.
Blink. Mm-hmm.
Plink.
Okay.
Yeah.
Blink.
Now, if, for example, they said blink with a B sound, a B sound, instead of a, like Peter, I would say, okay, listen up. And I'm like, watch my mouth. L, I, nk, or nk. depending upon who you are as to whether or not you want to do it as a blend or a non-blend. So then you would have them repeat it, and then you go, okay, plink, and then they go plink. And then what I would do is I would try and figure out, is it the full combination that they're having trouble with, just the by itself? So a lot of it is they can hear the individual sound, but when they coincides or is side by side with another sound, that's when their brain tends to glitch out on it. So as you play this game and you come out with like Tinker Stinker Splat and more complicated ones, and it's fun and it's silly and it doesn't need to be anything, and yes, you're going to get all sorts of inappropriate things coming out of their mouth that have bathroom humor. It's guaranteed. So, if you're embarrassed about those things, just don't do it at the line at the Publix, okay? But you can do this while you're waiting in line. It's kind of a fun little game. Listen, though, and try and keep track of the sounds your kids maybe frequently or at least occasionally repeatedly get wrong, that kind of thing, and then incorporate those more and more frequently into it. Break it down and make sure they have a chance to hear those sounds and really focus on them. And that's always a fun little game for them to work on whole sounds. The other one you can do is we call it Spell It. And so like my son, Simon, he did not learn his name was spelled S-I-M-O-N. We just didn't do that. We don't do letters of the alphabet until they hear the sounds, until they've got all the sounds down. And then once they get their sounds down, now we say, oh, by the way, the in Simon is written with an S. The I in Simon is written with an I. The in Simon is written with an M. The in Simon is written with an O, like in the word onion. The in Simon is written with an N. So he learned to spell his name and that was how he spelled his name. And so what we'll do is we'll play a little game where I'll say, okay, here's your word, and I'll say or. And then the answer is door. So they're blending these little sounds together. And that's where it's important to know what the sounds are because you don't want to use artificial blends. So if I wanted to say to you the word that's international. I wouldn't start there with a young child. I'd start with maybe 2 or 3 sound words, and they don't have to be real words either. You can make these things up, and it's always fun. And then another one that I will do just to help them work with manipulation of sounds is we'll take words and we will drop sounds. Usually on these ones I pick real words. So if I say to them, drive without the r, they'll say dive. And what they're basically doing is they're taking the first sound, they're ignoring that r sound, which is the second one, and taking the rest of the word and smashing it together. And it's like a cut and paste in their brain. But we want them to do it rapidly and quickly and without having to pause and think, and preferably without using the visual support because we want them to work exclusively with their auditory to start with, because if they're using visual support, that's kind of like an upside-down pyramid, because the written symbols are only as strong as the auditory can possibly be. So if you're using your written symbols to support your auditory, you're an upside-down pyramid.
So would you call it auditory processing, Tara?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a really big field. It's not an issue of I can't hear you. It's more of a I can't understand you sometimes. I don't hear that sound clearly. If you've ever been in a really loud, busy restaurant and you don't really pick up all the sounds of an individual, some kiddos have that issue. Certain sounds just literally like going to a black hole, or they hear them in a distorted way, or they hear them slightly off kilter. These are kind of things that can come into play, and it takes more brain power and more effort to try and fill in those blanks. And if they don't have a strong system to begin with, they're not as adept at filling in those blanks. So it can make them very, very frustrated, and it can give them an awful lot of struggles to follow and communicate. And oftentimes you'll see that students or individuals that have an auditory processing problem of one nature or another will often be reticent to raise their hand or to incorporate their thoughts into a conversation because they're just that little bit behind, kind of like that person who laughs a little late at the jokes.
Right.
It happens. It happens. It happens. And it is very common, but when you see it and you know it and you know what it is, then if you're the person who's around someone like that and they take too long, or they chime in on something about a conversation that was like 2 minutes ago, slow down your conversation or say to them, hey, what do you think about this? And give them time to actually think through. Give them a chance to actually engage in that conversation, because it's going to make it a whole lot easier for them. Because if they're sitting there trying to articulate what they were thinking about something you said at point A, and you're now at point C, they miss point B altogether. So they're missing out on the conversation, and they're missing out on that community.
So
and we see this a lot with kids, that if you give them like a 3 or 5 step command, and they can get really frustrated. You're giving them the same command every single time. Do this, do this, do this, do this. A, B, C, D, E. And they never seem to get it right. And they get frustrated, and they get angry, and you get frustrated, and you get angry. Well, there is a possibility that they're processing A so slowly that they're missing B, and then they're picking up the conversation at C, but you can't do C unless you do B, so the sequencing is out. And the next time they get A and B, but they miss C, and now they think that you're changing the instructions on them each time, and you're getting frustrated because you think you've given them the same instructions 1,000 times, you know? And so everybody's heightened emotions go crazy. And the reality is they're just not hearing it. So oftentimes, you know, I mean, I'm not a particular fan of Dora the Explorer, but you know how she does the do this, do this, do this, and she does the 3-point thing. What I'll often do is I'll actually have the kids sit down and go, if they're having trouble with this, I'll say, okay, here's what I want you to do. Here's number 1. Okay, now can you picture yourself doing it? Great. Okay, the next thing I need you to do is this. Can you picture yourself doing that? Yes. Okay, now go back and picture yourself doing 1 and then step 2. Okay, got it. Okay, here's step 3 that I want you to do. Can you picture it by itself? Yes. Okay, now do the 3 steps. Okay, now off you go, and when you're done, come back. Here's 4th step. Always come back and tell me you've completed it. And if you have any trouble along the way you can't remember, come back and see me. And then that way you can slowly encourage them to go through that process themselves. And then it doesn't take as long because they can do it more rapidly.
Very good. You know, Tara, you're such, I know you're such a knowledgeable person. I'm getting ahead of myself here. I'm thinking about the next thing. And, you know, I know if I was sitting in an audience here with you and I sitting at a panel, I would say, you know, couldn't you just listen to Tara all day, especially those who have children who are struggling, and we would get a round of applause. And, you know, it is so true. I'm definitely going to have you back. And for those of you listening, I tried to get Tara to do her own show, but she was so busy. So I think we're just going to try some of these sessions and get her on as many times as we can. And, you know, we'll let you know when that is, so stay tuned. And I know you are. You're a great sport, Tara.
Yeah, the problem I have right now is between the high schooler that I'm working with and my son, who will be 10 at the end of this month. He started acting and modeling, so we're in this hurry up and wait mode where, you know, he gets submitted for auditions, and then we have to wait, and then they tell us like an hour and a half before we have to be in Miami. We've got to run.
Which is impossible.
Commitments are really hard to do in advance,
Yeah, but it's fine. You know, this will be great. And so, you know, Tara, I think we've covered, you know, some of the questions that we had on our list were, you know, what are some tips for struggling learners that are trying to learn these sounds, as well as some fun games. And I'm definitely having you back. But before we get to questions, I want you to tell us about a website. I know I was after you for a long time to get this set up, and you did. And it is for parents to learn how to do some things, and what you have done, instead of giving a bunch of handouts or, you know, a lot of words that they have to read, you've created video, and some of these actually are with Simon, and you have some with Sierra as well.
Yes, I actually, I'm trying to think, did I have Sierra do any of them, or was she
because I know
Sierra? She might have been my camera lady because she's my behind-the-scene kid.
Yeah, Sierra is like my Ann, and it, you know, give me a cloaking device so I can be invisible rather than, you know, we'll do it and we're great at it, but we would rather be behind the scenes. So
Yeah.
I know that's
well, one thing that I'm going to encourage everyone to do, if you're working auditory with your kiddo, I'm going to encourage you to go online and Google phonics phone, and that's spelled PHONIC as in Charlie, S like in Sam, and then PHONE. And you will come up with some information about something called a phonics phone by the Candle Foundation. And they even have a thing on how to make your own phonics phone, and these are kind of neat. And basically what they are is they're PVC piping that you can make, and what you do is you hold this up to your ear, preferably your right ear, because your right ear is connected to your left hemisphere, which is your auditory central. It doesn't mean that your right hemisphere doesn't work, but your left hemisphere is your auditory central, unless you're me and you're hearing impaired in your right ear, in which case you've modified your brain. But in any case, what you do is you hold it up to your right ear, and as you speak into it, and do it very quietly because it amplifies quite dramatically, it allows you to hear your own voice without ambient noise interfering with it. And you can decorate them and all sorts of cool things. But I encourage using that. It makes a difference. And since these are made of PVC piping that are just connected together, you can also twist it and then reproduce the sound. What I've done on the website is I've made sure that I've pronounced the sounds very, very clearly, because an awful lot of times people inappropriately pronounce sounds, and then they teach their kids how to do it incorrectly very well. I know one person who will remain nameless unless she speaks up, who did a great job on teaching her kid to clap all out of speed, because she was teaching them, and her speed was off a little bit. Kids started out fine. Kid learned how to do it wrong, and then we had to undo and retrain. Don't know who that was, Felice.
She's telling on me, but she does love me. So
right, yeah. But the reality is we don't want to teach incorrectly, because they will learn. Just like any other thing, you can learn a bad habit just as fast as you can learn a good one. And it's always easier to teach it right the first time than it is to inadvertently teach it incorrectly and then have to unlearn that pathway and redo a new one.
So you figured that out when you were working with my child, that and you just asked me, well, let's see how you're doing, and and voila, it's called, and I'm going to jump in here because you forgot to give the site. It's braintrainersconnection.com is where you will find that, and Tara has an introductory rate that you can take a peek at.
And
that.
I have about 4 months. I have about 4 or 5 months up and running. I've not pursued it in a big way because, honestly, there is a fair bit of attrition because it does take a lot of effort and dedication on the part of the parents. And the parents that have called me and said, you know what, I'm having struggles with this, each and every one of them I tested, each and every one of them had their own auditory or visual processing or whatever problems of their own. And it's really hard to teach something when you yourself are struggling. And it's because it's uncomfortable for you to do. I mean, I'm not going to go running because I'm not in shape. It's not comfortable for me, so I'm not going to go take my kids out running because I'm not comfortable doing it. And the same happens with any of these areas. And I'm just going to caution parents on this. Listen, don't think that I'm saying if your kids are struggling, it means that you've got issues, because obviously you're functioning very well. You're doing a wonderful job homeschooling your kids, or you're working with your kids in other areas. Don't get me wrong, that is not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is, though, as adults, sometimes, though, we tend to let certain skills slide as well because we're not using them as frequently as we had maybe when we were younger, and therefore it's not second nature to us. That might also be a component, or there truly might be a struggle there as well. But in any case, if it's difficult and challenging for you, it's well worth, contacting me, and let me see if I can get you with a trainer, whether it's on Skype or whether if you're in my local area with me, working with you so that you can feel comfortable doing this, and working as a partner team. If you're strong in some areas and weak in others, I can work on the areas that you're weak in, and you can take up the mantle on those areas where you're strong. And it makes all the difference in the world, because where you're confident and comfortable, you are going to excel. And I see this just in my regular homeschool day. I mean, Felice knows anytime glue and glitter comes out and they're dealing with the word art, I'm running. I am out of the room and pawning my kids off on anybody and everybody can, because I know this is not my forte. And if I have to sit down and do art and glitter and glue, I am a miserable person. I'm unhappy. It comes out in my attitude and tone. Nobody enjoys the class because I'm such a miserable person to be around, and it doesn't end up accomplishing the goal of everybody having fun doing art. And so I do parcel out, even in my own homeschooling day, those things that are not my area of expertise or not my area of interest or joy. And so don't make your life or your kids' life miserable by working on those areas that you also are struggling with or just don't like or feel terribly underconfident on. Get some help in those areas and then work on the ones that you are comfortable and confident in, and work in a partnership arrangement. That's the whole point of co-ops. That's the whole point of, even a community like this where you get together with others. Use the strength of those around you. And don't just think you have to muscle your way through it, because that's going to make life. Well, ask my kids. I did art one year. They don't want to do it with me anymore.
That is so funny, because you're right. That is an area that's a strength for me, and I love it, and I love the grandkids coming over and us doing art. I don't like glitter as much, though, Tara, I will have to admit, but I do like a lot of the art stuff. But you know what, Tara, we talked a little bit about some of the games and things, and I know some of your video training goes over some of those. And when we worked with our children with our the brain training, a lot of it was games, and it was interesting how that worked out, and that's the book that Tara someday is going to write. We have got to get that in print, because it is amazing what that book will do. She has a lot of great ideas. This is just a little bit that she spouted off here, but Tara has some ways to be able to teach using just regular board games that are in the house. So I know you started that book, and there's just not enough time.
Well, you have to co-write it with me,
everything.
because when I tried to write it, my lawyer brain kicked in, and it started reading like an extremely dry instruction manual. It was just deadly. So it needs to keep its life. I don't know what it is. When I speak, hopefully I'm a little bit more enthusiastic and lively, but for some reason when I write, it comes out like some very boring legal brief, and I wouldn't want to read it, so I'm sure nobody else would. So help me co-write it, and we'll be off and running.
Great. She's putting some pressure on me here live.
Maybe I'll get Jane to help us write that while we're out here, and we can go into it as a joint venture.
That would be fun. Okay, well, let's get to some of the questions now. We have quite a few here, and I know we've already run out of time, so more than likely this is going to be a two-part audio, so we can get on to all of these questions here. So Lisa from Vancouver asked, could you please explain why my son is so unsettled by unfamiliar languages? If we are in a place where other languages are being spoken, he wants to flee, or at the very least, he will have a pained look on his face and try to cover his ears. Thank you in advance.
There's a lot of reasons for that. Primarily, I would say that, as I said, there's between 44 and 48 sounds in the English language. Other languages have different sounds. And so now you're adding additional sounds. And a lot of times we'll have individuals that when they're overwhelmed by sound or any kind of sensory input, but in this case we're dealing probably with sound. If he's overwhelmed with the sound, it may be either perceived as being extremely loud to him because it's a new sound and it's just basically drilling to his brain, or it may be that it's so confusing to him that it's overwhelming him because he cannot grapple with it because his brain isn't wired for that particular sound or combination of sounds. And it may fatigue him, and he's instinctively doing what he knows is right. Interestingly enough, like I said, my son's in acting and modeling, and we were going through, it was this big, huge auditorium. Actually, it was at the Gaylord Palm, believe it or not, where we have the homeschool convention, and they had something like 50 or 60 VIPs there that were interviewing the individuals. They were agents and so forth, and it was exceedingly loud in there. And I knew that just that hum and the background noise and all that different stuff and different terms that he'd not become that familiar with would be a drain on his system. So we actually put earplugs in while we were in there, and then when we only had one person, like right in front of us before we talked to the agent, we took the earplugs out, and his fatigue level was significantly less than many of the other kids. In fact, many of the other adults. Because when you're dealing with new sounds or new words or new information, it's overstimulation of the brain, and he's doing a protective response to it. And sometimes it can also be increased sound. There's a really neat program out there that I really like. It's not the cheapest one. It usually runs, at least the last time I looked, about $1,200 to $1,500. But the neat thing is 10 days long. Woo! I love it when they go fast. But it's called Berard AIT. That's BERARD, and then the initials AIT for Auditory Integration Therapy. And it's not one of these do-it-yourself things. They actually have specially trained people. I looked into it, and I couldn't afford all the time and the equipment and everything. But what they do is they have you do an audiogram, and it works an awful lot on noise sensitivity and volume sensitivity and pitches and frequencies. And what they do is they help train the brain to be able to deal with those pitches and frequencies and volumes without being overloading in the system, and allow the brain to be able to actually acclimate it. And it uses the same science of neuroplasticity that I use for my regular cognitive training. It's more of a passive one, though, because as they pipe the music in that's modified based on that individual's audiogram needs, the sounds hit the tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane moves. It changes it into electrical stimulus, and it literally repetitively drills those new sound components and the new noise tolerance levels into the brain. They do a half an hour of training, a minimum of 3 hours break, and then a half an hour of listening training each day for 5 days. And then you have to get another audiogram because the changes are that significant that on the 5th day they need to change the machine input based on the new audiogram in order to be able to upload the modifications for the last 5 days. I made my husband go through this, and it improved his singing at church. It's not as often as it used to be because he can now actually hear the sounds. So, there's not a one-size-fits-all, but that sounds like, he's overly sensitive to sounds that he's maybe not as familiar to, and he's doing a naturally instinctive protective component there.
Oh, that's wonderful, because the next question from Lisa was also, could you please discuss current therapies for auditory processing that have proven results? So you answered that question without meaning to.
Yeah, the Berard AIT is good for the high-pitch, low-pitch, high-volume, low-volume, high-sound, low-sound kind of component. It does not address the actual identification and clarity of the individual sound components. The programs that I use and that Brain Potential Institute of Texas uses, those ones deal specifically with sound recognition and their symbolic, their code, their alphabet letter associations, and the reading comprehension component. Those ones are absolutely excellent. There's more that are out there, but those are the ones that I tend to focus on. And they do very distinctly different things. So my daughter went through an auditory processing protocol for cognitive retraining, and we also did the Berard AIT.
Very good. Okay, and another question. My son has sensory processing disorder. He's extremely sensitive to sound to the point where he can hear noises coming from the TV when it is mute. Think Spider-Man sensitivity, the volume of noise, high-pitched noises, too many noises. He would cower trying to listen to this podcast because the sounds are not clear. He cannot listen to online classes through the computer. These challenges complicate the actual processing of information because it's so difficult to deliver the sound itself in a way that doesn't bother him. So how can you start to deal with this issue, and is there a therapy that you're aware of? So I'm not sure that other therapy you mentioned would work as well.
Berard AIT would probably be where I start. I can hear flies walking on tinfoil. My high-pitched hearing is excellent. Even though I have a hearing impairment in my right ear, it does tend to be in the male vocal ranges. So I actually jokingly say when my husband whispers sweet nothings in my right ear, that's what I get, nothing. But high-pitched frequencies I'm really good at. And I can hear the squeal of the TV and, yeah, I'm there with him. I get it. There are a couple of things, but I think the Berard AIT probably is a really good start, and the fact that it's 10 days is really great. One of the things that I have found, and there is a kind of a caveat to the Berard, since they're drilling new brain pathways on that, think back to when your child was young and they were babbling, and then they started to walk. They stopped babbling while they were walking because they were working on a new skill. And so there are occasions where when they're doing the new neural pathway training for the auditory sensitivity components, the foreground, background noise kind of thing, there may be some other components of their behavior that may digress temporarily, but it's that whole, my brain is working on something new, so I'm putting everything else at abeyance. So there have been some cases where they've indicated that for a season, some other features or functions or behavior have diminished, and then it all matches back up again once the brain resolves itself. But I would definitely check. If you go to Berard AIT online, just Google it.
I just found it. It's Berard, BERARD AIT.
BERARD And then if you just click on that, let me pull it up, make sure I've got the right one.
It says website.com. Make sure that's the right one because there's several. It says it's the official website for the Berard method.
Right, and then what they do is, and they're only approved people. The people that work with Berard are not just garden variety, I've paid money. They have to be either a certified audiologist, they have to be OTs or PTs, or somebody who's been working in the training field with auditory processing a minimum of 5 years. And when they do the training, they also set it up in a way that the main trainer or trainers under whom you're working, they actually do case reviews on each of your cases as well to make sure that you're doing it correctly for about, I think it's about 6 months to a year, to make sure that you're not incorrectly interpreting the data or setting things up. So there's a great deal of oversight, and that's what I love about it, is the fact that it's not a one-size-fits-all package. It's per student, and they have assurances that the individuals that are administering it are under supervision and following the protocol. That's the one main reason that I switched to the brain potential protocols over the one that I was using before, is that all of the trainers through Brain Potential Institute did go through cognitive skills assessments themselves to make sure they were firing all cylinders themselves before they started working with students, and there was a great deal of supervision and training with a senior trainer before you were turned loose on any students. And so that's one of the reasons I do the Berard as a recommendation, and I personally used it with both my husband and my daughter. And with my daughter, she was having trouble distinguishing where sounds were coming from. She had no trouble hearing the sounds, but, for example, if she was sitting underneath a basketball hoop, she couldn't tell whether the ball was going to bounce away or drop straight down on her. And she had other sensory issues, physical sensory defensiveness, and so she was constantly looking up, making sure the ball wasn't going to hit her in the head. Once she went through Berard, she sat there quietly underneath the basketball hoop and then just periodically put her hand up because she could then tell that the ball was dropping to hit her or could hit her so she could block it. And the rest of the time she could tell from the way the bounce sounded that it was moving away because she didn't do that before.
Yeah, and I can remember that about Terra, you know, that Annie played basketball with her, and she would run down the court and go grab Sierra by the shoulders and gently put her somewhere and then go do whatever and then go get her, because sometimes she was being frozen on the court, you know, with 20 people yelling at her, and of course everybody screaming.
Right.
As basketball
and
is
also,
for kids.
And basketball's fairly physical and
right. But then we saw her. But we saw her later, and you know, here's a child making goals and doing great. And I do have to, I have to share too that with the therapies that my kids went through, the brain training that we did, sports did plummet a little bit, as you said they would. And then, then they did pick up and they did better than they had before. So that is part of, what happens when their brain is being rewired, so to speak.
Right.
Well, girl, we are completely out of time.
Well, may I add one more thing just before we leave?
Sure,
you made a
absolutely.
comment
of course
a minute
you
ago.
Can. Did I think I was getting off that easy?
No. Yeah, you made a comment a minute ago about the activities being a lot game-like, and they are. However, it's very important that the individual who's doing the training with the student and the student themselves also identify the underlying skill that's being worked on, because then they can apply it to other non-game-like environments like their academic or their social settings. And the example that I give on this is we all know at least one person who can do calculus and advanced mathematics, and they have no clue how to balance a checkbook. We don't want them to succeed at the game and not be able to succeed at life. That is an artificial benefit. If it looks good on paper but it doesn't translate, it doesn't help. What we like to do is we like to actually look at the underlying skill and go, okay, where could you use this in your academic setting? Where could you use this in your social setting? And it would be no different than if I were to teach you how to sweep and then say to you, okay, what is the skill that you're using here? It's like I'm using an item in order to gather things. Great. Okay. What about mopping? Well, basically the same skill, slight variation on the same thing. What about shoveling snow, which fortunately we don't have to do here in Florida? Same basic skill, slightly modified. But if they just learn how to sweep but they don't understand what the underlying concept is, they're not going to be able to replicate that in a similar but different setting. And so we need to really make sure as they're doing these games and activities, they understand the purpose behind it and preferably letting them come up with suggestions on how it can be used in other settings, because then they're more likely to remember, recall, and utilize it.
Very good. And I am going to get with you, Tara, and we're going to put up some blog posts on taking some elements of games and put that up. So hopefully that will be our start to our book. How's that?
I like that. That'll work.
Yeah. Well, truthfully, I'm the one who wants the book, so Tara already can do all the stuff. And just a comment from a mom who is, and she did say Vancouver, from British Columbia, and she said she was furiously taking notes because she has a friend who needs to hear this. So want to let you know that the audio is going to be up actually today as we're recording this. This goes up very quickly because Tara is such a pro. There are a couple of little sound glitches, but that's okay. We can move through those. And we are going to be getting Tara back again to answer some more of your questions. So if you have a specific topic that you would like covered, as always, and any of our show hosts on the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network are willing to do that. So just drop them a line. And one of the best ways to contact our show hosts is on their show pages. You can go to the front of the website and find them through the little picture graph that's there. As well as with me, if you have something that you would like Tara to cover in future episodes, just send us an email and I will get Tara on the line.
Or quickly jot it down right now before Felice gets up.
That's right, before I get off, because then I'm into the next thing. But, so, and we'll be praying for this mom who said she's in a new season where they have moved on from therapies due to improvement, but they are getting into a new season, so that's great. And there's going to be a lot of information for you on Tara's website, thebraintrainers.net, and that's plural on trainers. And then also,
and it has a link to the other. It has a link to the braintrainersconnection.com.
Yeah, braintrainersconnection.com is the other one where you can take a look at that and what Tara has to offer, which really is an amazing set. So, will definitely help any parent. Because really when we talk about brain training, we didn't even really get into that word specifically, Tara, but when we talk about that, it's for even good students to be able to improve. And
absolutely.
You know,
and I'll be honest with you, I have a lot of what I would call gifted with a glitch.
Mm-hmm.
And these are kids that are absolutely gifted in a variety of areas, and they're actually what I would call age appropriate in some others, but they feel glitchy in those areas by comparison as well.
Right, very good. Well, it was wonderful having you, Tara, and glad you live in the same town as I do, and I have to call you on an episode like this to talk to you.
There you go. You're the one who's busy.
I know. We're both. Well, we're both. So listen, God bless. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and I'll see you Wednesday for Woody's current events in the Constitution class at 1:30 Eastern Time. Yes. Wonderful class. If you haven't checked it out, definitely do so.
Yes, Tara keeps us on our toes because she's got that attorney side of the house with the questions and everything. So I do. That's true. I get to chat with you on text chat on Wednesdays at 1.
Yeah, the political weenie.
That's so good. All right. Well, listen, take care. God bless. And we will see you next week for Vintage Homeschool Moms.
All righty. We'll catch you later. I'll see you Wednesday online. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Vintage Homeschool Moms Show. Visit Felice at MediaAngels.com and to VintageHomeschoolMoms.com. Vintage Homeschool Moms is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network.